Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 277. Today we're talking all things related to chasing mature bucks with Joe Rentmeester, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine on whatever day of April this happens to be. It's crazy that we're jumped into April. Lots of turkey seasons are opening up. I'm watching buddies of mine kill birds in different states. Pennsylvania opens up here in a couple more weeks. Well, right at the end of the month. And I gotta say, man, I'm pretty excited for the turkey trip that I'm taking this year. Well, I shouldn't even say it's a turkey trip. It's just I'm making a concerted effort to hunt turkeys. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And was actually scouting this past weekend where I'm planning to do some turkey hunting, and actually saw two birds, which was cool. Well, two hens, and was with my buddy Aaron Hepler, and we where we were kind of laid camp down. We actually, the first morning that we were there, we actually had a few gobblers fire up for us in the morning. So that was kind of cool because I really wasn't sure where birds might be in that general area. And they let us know. So that was awfully helpful. Had a really good weekend, did some scouting, made it finally back to the piece that I've been trying to make it back to for what seems like months now, and finally made that happen. Really good weekend, saw a lot of good stuff, things that I was hoping to see. And then I think even in some instances, pleasantly surprised by what I had seen in certain places. So really feel good about how things are coming together there. But not going to give away too many of the details there. I have a whole podcast coming out here in the next week or two with Aaron and Tom after the kind of a post-scout debrief, if you will, that will kind of fill everyone in on that day's or this past weekend's events. But just going to kind of jump to today's podcast. Have Joe Rentmeester on today. So a lot of you folks who know of Joe, a lot of you folks probably know of Joe, and those of you who do probably know of him through the Hunting Beast, or maybe whenever he was on the Public Land Challenge with the Hunting Beast and the Hunting Public guys the past couple years. Joe is from Wisconsin, killer mature buck hunter. He's one of those dudes where he just gets it. And I think what I most appreciate about Joe is just in the conversations he and I were having leading up to us actually doing a podcast. We were kind of just chatting on Instagram about, different deer behavior and things that we've seen and stuff like that, and asking each other questions. And I think that's probably what I appreciate most about him is just his genuine interest in understanding and seeking understanding and never feeling like he has everything kind of figured out. I think it's a really good trait to have just in general, but I think it's doubly so whenever you start talking about whitetail hunting and trying to put all the puzzle pieces together, because you typically get a brand new puzzle every year. And you certainly can take things from one season to the next and things that you learn about deer behavior and things like that year over year. But he always kind of looks at it as a new. And and always trying to uncover those things that are going to help him get a leg up in the upcoming season. And he often does get a leg up. So really enjoyed this conversation. We'll just go ahead and jump into today's show. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on a gentleman I've been wanting to talk to for a while. I don't want to say we're cut from the same cloth, but I think we've probably picked things up from a lot of the same people. And I've kind of been watching this fella at afar and kind of marveling at what he's able to do, especially when it kind of comes to swamp hunting. And I know you're just kind of a student of the game in general, so I'm really looking forward to diving into other areas of hunting outside of swamps. But I'm talking to none other than Mr. Joe Rentmeester. What's going on, brother?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. How's you're in Wisconsin, right?
Yep. We're in Wisconsin. We got a few snowflakes falling right now, actually, and some rain at the same time. But yep.
That's that lovely. For everyone out there listening, we're actually recording this in March, so that's the end of lovely March, beginning of April weather, where you're not quite sure what you're going to get every day when you get up.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's nice.
Yeah.
There's actually good shed hunting weather. Everything is real dark and dreary, and if you're looking for some antlers, you can see them a little bit better in this weather. So. To be optimistic.
There you
time
go.
Of year for that.
There you go. Silver lining, man. Silver lining.
Yeah.
Always looking for the positive. I like that. But for me, the best shed hunting weather for me is the kind where people just bring me the sheds, because I sure as hell can't find them. So yeah, I'm the world's worst shed hunter for whatever reason. I think part of it is that. Yeah, it's like any kind of working guy. I think, I have limited time, so whenever I get out and I'm able to go out and scout, or shed hunt or whatever it is, it ends up ultimately kind of turning it into a scout, because that's what I like to do, and I'm just not a good enough shed hunter to kind of divide. Some people are really good at it. I have buddies who can scout and shed hunt at the same time, and neither suffers. I'm just not able to kind of divide myself that way. If I'm going to shed hunt, I have to focus on shed hunting, or I won't pick any up. And that's usually the case, because I can't focus on it long enough. And it ultimately ends up turning into a deer scouting session. And I kind of throw sheds out the window probably within like the first hour of looking.
Okay. And do you have a lot of pressure by you where you might have people beating you to them, where it's, if you're not out that day or the day after, you're not going to get it? Or do you, what's it like for you that way?
I don't know, man. Like the hunting pressure around here is nuts. Like I will say that. Now I don't know how big shed hunting is around here. I don't know. I bet part of it is that I would guess. And part of it is just, maybe I know part of it is I'm just really, really bad at finding them, like. Okay. I've literally walked past them with a friend of mine. Last year, we were scouting this big woods piece together. It was the first time we had been there, and it was a big cut that had been burned. And we're walking through it, and I'm like, man, I can never find any sheds. And he's like, hey, you just walked right by one, like literally. So
yeah, it's something you have to train your eye for. And it's almost like having a shed dog. The more sheds you can find, the more sheds you can teach that dog to find, the better you get, the better the dog gets. And your eyeballs have to kind of learn the shape that they're looking for, it seems.
Yeah. And well, I did start training my dog to try to find sheds, because I figured between the two of us, maybe one of us will find one. And so I've been working with him in the yard. Actually had, dude from Dog Bone Hunter on, and have been training my pup, I guess, for like the past year. He does pretty good. Like he's able to do all the commands, and he does everything in the yard, and I take him different places to kind of get him distracted and make him run through his routine and stuff like that. And he does a really good job. And last year whenever I'd ask him to find the sheds, and when we were out looking, he wouldn't really know what it meant. Like he would just kind of start looking around. He wasn't sure what to do. And now at least whenever I tell him to find sheds, because I'll get to an area that maybe I'm walking through and I'm seeing some like a ton of scat, or whatever the case is, or it's a big green briar patch, that, deer in the winter are going to want to feed on and spend some time around. I'll kind of point and say, hey, find sheds, and he'll take off. Now he knows. And so he'll take off running to where I'm pointing, and he'll start looking around. And so
okay.
I think he's probably better at shed hunting than I am at this point.
Well, that's a positive.
Right.
And then hopefully you can get him to the point where he's picking up the big ones for you. And yeah. You don't have to worry about your skills. You can just count on the pup.
Yeah. So did you find a lot of sheds this year?
Yeah, I've done pretty well. For me, it's always been it's a case of beating people to them. So I kind of categorize it into two different sheds. You've got your hard to find sheds, where you've got a deer that's kind of hanging out in a place where you just hope to find them. Maybe you got a deer living in a piece of big woods, and them sheds are somewhere in that big woods. And those are the hard to find sheds. And then you got your easy to find sheds, which are the ones, you get your crop fields that are left on public land each year. And if you can hit up those crop fields every single morning before everybody else does, you can pick up a handful of sheds. And that's kind of what I did this year. Found all the easy sheds. Haven't really had enough time to look for the hard to find sheds.
Right. Yeah, I need some of those easy ones. I think I got to find
Yeah.
I got to find a place wherever those are at around here. That's I think probably where I like to refer to those as the remedial sheds. Like like you'd have remedial classes in school and stuff like that. Like maybe I wasn't good at math, so I had remedial math. Like
Sure.
I need remedial sheds, I think is what I need.
That'll work. Yep.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
absolutely.
Nice, man. Well, hey,
Absolutely.
but before we get too far down the path, I know a lot of folks, likely know who you are or have heard of you or have seen a video of you on the Hunting Beast or whatever the case is. But for any of those folks that are listening to this, and most people listening to this probably know who you are, but before we get down the rabbit hole of talking about, all things deer hunting, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of let people know, where you're from, what you do for a living, just a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from southeastern Wisconsin. We got some public land out here. It's very high pressure public land, which is good and bad. You learn to be a good hunter if you're going to kill deer, but it is hard to get them. In terms of work, right now I'm self-employed. I've got some vacation rentals, so that's nice. Gives me some flexibility, and then I'm always doing different little side jobs. And that's kind of my spiel right now.
Nice, man. I know Chad and those guys from Exodus came out to see you. Was it this past summer or was it the fall?
Yes.
It was
Yep,
this.
this past.
It was this past summer, yeah. And I remember
Yep.
I was talking to him, and he was mentioning that you did the vacation rentals and stuff like that. And it was funny because at that same time I was kind of looking, and he was like, yeah, he's like, at some point he's like, you have to meet Joe. And he's like, maybe pick his brain about it. He's like, because that's what he's doing. And so how did you get into that? I mean, it sounds like it would be pretty good for a person who wants the flexibility to be able to get out to hunt, to scout and stuff like that. It feels like that would be a pretty good route to go.
Yeah. So I lived with my parents as long as I could, just so I could save money. And at one point, they're like, "You need to get out of here." So I quickly needed to find a house, and I found a property that had a guest house on it, and it's pretty close to a local racetrack out here where we get like NASCAR, June sprints, all that stuff. And my sister's like, "Check this out. You should buy this house and rent out the guest house on Airbnb." And I said, "Okay, let's take a look at it, give it a whirl." And when I got there, it was just so unique. We put an offer in, snagged it up, and it worked out well. And I guess the rest is history. Is kind of how we got started on it.
Nice.
It's been good. It's like any business. It's a learning process. You figure out what works. You have your problems. You solve them.
Right.
It's been interesting. There's been plenty of times where I'm like, Jesus, this is a waste of time. I should just do a 9 to 5 and that's it. But it's rewarding. I like it. And then what has it been, 6 years now? And I'm starting to get that freedom, that flexibility,
Right.
which works really good for having kids and stuff like that. So
Right.
it's been good.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, 6 years, man, that's a while, you know what I mean? And I was just going to mention, it's nice, especially, as your kids get older and stuff like that, and they have, they want to traipse along the woods with you, or they want to go hunt, or they have a ball game or something like that. You don't have to really worry about trying to wedge it in between everything else. You just kind of make your schedule, the way you need it, and you're good to go.
Correct. Yep. Yeah.
Nice.
It works very well.
Nice.
But it takes time, takes hard work, takes an investment. So
Yeah.
not easy.
Yeah, as all good things do, right? Whether it's hunting
Yes,
or
absolutely.
career or whatever it is. So speaking of hunting, man, like,
Absolutely.
I'm not real familiar, like with Wisconsin just in general. I mean, I know a few folks out there. I know Dan, of course, Jared and the guys from Whitetail Adrenaline and stuff like that. Like I know, I've spoke with him in the past, and actually I met a really good dude from Wisconsin whenever I was hunting in Missouri. He was probably one of the best people I've ever met on a hunting trip. And I know that Wisconsin has, big time hunting heritage, similar, I would say, like to Michigan and or Pennsylvania, right? But so how did you get started hunting? Was it something like, was it just a hunting family? Your grandfather, your dad did it, and it was just, it was in the cards that you were going to do it regardless, or did you start off a
Yeah.
different way?
Nope. That's exactly what it was. It's the whole. I was actually talking to Bo from East Meets West about this the other night, and it's if you watch the THP episodes with Jake from the hunting public in Wisconsin, and you watch how everybody gets all suited up in orange and goes out for drinks the night before. That's kind of what it is. And
Mhm.
then on top of that, my dad bow hunted, so I started bow hunting because my dad did, and had my first deer come in, and had a doe come in the first night, and a buck come in the first night, and I was hooked. There was no going back after that.
Nice, nice. It's yeah. I mean, Pennsylvania is very similar in that regard, where if you're especially if you grew up in rural PA like I did, it was a birthright. It was going to happen. Funny
Yeah.
story was my dad is retiring here at the beginning of April, and he just built his retirement home back here in PA. He was living in the Carolinas for like I guess the past 20 years or so, and he had a whole box of stuff to give me. It was like old wrestling singlets that I had from when I wrestled in high school and like wrestling shoes and just all this stuff. And he's like, hey, here's all this crap I had in my attic of yours. I don't want it anymore. Like throw it away, take it, do whatever you're going to do with it. It had like my baby book in it from whenever I was born. I started flipping through it, just kind of looking at it. And I didn't realize this, but like I think the first time I ever went hunting, he took me out whenever I was probably like 4 or 5, took me out turkey hunting, to shoot a turkey.
Yep.
And that was my first trip, out into the outdoors. And, basically from there, it was kind of written in the cards that was going to be part of what I did. And certainly the same thing as you mentioned, it was hanging out with uncles and grandpap and stuff like that at camp and going out and slinging a rifle around. And I didn't start bow hunting until I was probably 30, I guess is when I started bow hunting because my dad didn't really bow hunt a whole lot. He would hunt with a recurve some in the fall whenever he would have a windy day or a wet day, and he could do some stalking. But otherwise, he didn't really bow hunt much. But yeah, man, it sounds like the heritage is pretty thick out there, just like it here is here in PA.
Yeah, it is. And it also sometimes seems too, if you watch kids, I've watched a lot of young kids grow up around hunting situations, and some kids are just eaten up with it immediately. They see the squirrel hunting and the goose hunting and the duck hunting, and they get all excited, and it's in their blood. And other kids see it, and they're like, "Oh, not for me." So yeah, it's a heritage, but it's like some kids just don't latch onto it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's everybody's different that way.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because my cousin and I grew up together and we played baseball together, football together, like everything. And we lived right down, the road from each other. And we both started hunting right about the same age, and we were hunting camp together and stuff like that. And, I really latched onto it. And even through like high school, like he stopped hunting probably when we were, I don't know, 14 or so. Like he just didn't really have an interest in it. But it wasn't that he wasn't given an opportunity to or wasn't around it a lot because he was around it just as much as I was. And so, I guess just I think hunting is one of those things where you kind of really have to make sure, at least in my opinion, my dad always did a really good job of making sure that there was no like pressure and it was more about the experience of like being outdoors and, like freedom of just being able to walk wherever you want to walk and taking in nature, not so much killing something. Like that was like the furthest from his, I guess, goal when we would go out. It was always
Okay.
just appreciating the environment and appreciating the experience. And first and foremost was safety and ethics. Like it was those two things. Like if he felt like I didn't have those two things in check, like I wasn't going. That was just all there was to it. And so it wasn't so much about the kill as it was about the appreciation for everything else besides that, essentially.
Okay. Yeah, for me, got safety and ethics were very important. Um, but for me, it was it was. I remember, I think it was like the first year that I could turkey hunt, and I remember it was the last. I think Sunday was the last day of turkey season, and I didn't get a turkey. And I remember, I shouldn't even say this on a podcast, but I remember crying because I didn't get one. And then it was like my second year deer hunting with the gun. The first year I got a buck, and then the second year it was like the last. We were down to the wire, and a fork buck ran by, and I missed it like 6 times, and I remember crying then too.
Yeah.
For me, it was we have to get a deer. It was
Yeah. Okay. Well, so since
my
you
dad.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say my dad understood that it was all or nothing. It was, and then
Right.
as you get older, once you get 16, 17, you start to kind of, for me, you start to smell the roses and you appreciate being in the woods rather than being at school or being in the office or whatever. So for me, it was a little different that way.
Yeah, well, it's funny since you were confident enough to share that little bit of embarrassment, if you will. I didn't have too terribly of or too terrible, or I guess a story that was too terribly different from yours. The first buck that I missed was like this little button buck, and I did the same thing. Like I cried, and
Yeah.
I almost feel like looking back on it, I don't even know why I did. It seems really irrational, but I think it
Yeah.
was more of, you know, I think
You want it so bad,
yeah, you want
and
it
then
so
you can't have it
yeah,
because you failed.
you want it so bad, and I think also it's one of those things. You're at that point, and I might have been maybe 13 when that happened or something like that. It was like first or second year that I was able to actually carry a firearm, um, and I feel like it was also kind of connected to this idea of, in PA where I grew up in rural PA, and it might be the same way in Wisconsin. It was like you kind of establish yourself within the pecking order of like these men that you grew up
Yes.
idolizing. Like they were just
Yeah.
30 foot tall and bulletproof, right? And you would do anything to be like for them to consider you not necessarily equal across all things, but that you were on the come up and at least you were an equal at hunting camp. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and so it was that desire more so to like just be part of the guys than it was really to kill a deer. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
I wanted to belong. I wanted to feel like one of the old guys. And then the other cool story was, so I missed one, and cried. And then the first one I finally killed, I don't remember how old I was. I was maybe 14 or something like that, or 15. I don't remember how old I was. Well, I guess I shouldn't say the first one I killed. The first rack buck I killed, put it that way. I shot it, and my dad was hunting a ridge over from me, and yeah, I was like, man, I'm gonna get this deer out of here by myself, and I could pull the truck to like this log yard landing, and I can basically get the deer back to the house and get it strung up, and I want to get strung up and skinned out before Dad comes out. And so I did all that, and my dad comes up to the house, because we had a back 40, where I grew up, and comes up to the garage. He's like, "Hey, where's your deer at?" And he's like, "Did you let it in the woods?" It's like, "No." I was like, "I got him hung up here." I mean, it was the worst skinning and butchering job you would ever want to see. It was awful, but it was one of those things where my uncles and stuff were standing around and like, "Well, I'll be damned." He did it. Like, and I was a small kid too. I mean, at that point in my life, I think I was wrestling like 80 or 90 pounds. So the fact that I was able to hoist that deer up and get it up, that they were kind of like, all right, you're one of the guys now. And that was kind
Yeah.
of that was kind of when I arrived.
Yep. Yep. No,
Yeah.
that's cool. And that's probably more of what it was for me too, is trying to show everybody that I could do it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
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 Yep. I think you nailed it.
And then as you get older, you realize, well, that's silly, and I should just do this because it's a lot better than being in at work or whatever. Just to
Yeah.
appreciate being outside of four walls.
Yes. Yeah.
But man, I want to pivot here really quick and kind of, I guess, stay on the topic somewhat of Wisconsin in general. But mentioned before, like you and Dan are good friends, and I've always just been kind of curious, you know, how you guys, how you guys met. And at what point in like your hunting journey did you meet Dan? Like, did you guys just kind of run into each other, or was it something that you were like on the Hunting Beast forum and like struck up a conversation with him, or how did you guys end up becoming friends?
Yeah. That was exactly it. We were. I had a bajillion questions about everything. I mean, when I walk in the woods and then walk out, I would leave the woods with 20 questions. So then I would head over to the Hunting Beast site and make post after question after question, and got to know him that way.
Nice. What is, I mean, I think the great thing about Dan just in general is like he's super giving with his time, and he'll answer people's questions, and he truthfully wants to. I think he's just a great steward, especially for people who want to be, hunt mobile and, enjoy challenging hunts and stuff like that. And I think what's kind of interesting is like doing this podcast for as long as I have, like you meet different people who have been influenced by Dan like in different ways, right?
Mhm.
And there's so many people that have different styles, right? But they've kind of like the genesis of it was a lot of times the hunting beast is kind of getting their questions answered in those areas and learning new tactics and strategies and stuff like that. So I'm curious, two things. The first part is, what do you think is the most important thing that you picked up from Dan? And it might not be something that you picked up specifically from him. It might be something that framed a way you think about something that you use going forward, or it might be a specific tactic or strategy that you picked up from him. What's the one, like, I guess the most important thing that you picked up from him?
Yeah, the biggest thing that jumps out at me right away. So when I started hitting the woods with him and just paying attention, reading sign, paying attention to what's happening, we'd walk into a woodlot and he'd go, "Oh, the sign looks cold in here," and I'd be like, "Okay, it does." Or we'd walk into a woodlot and he'd say, "Oh, the sign looks hot in here," and you just got just paying attention to the big picture, seeing the little detail. Um, it's something you got to see somebody doing at a higher level to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if that makes sense. So
Totally.
it's when you walk into the woods, seeing and noticing every detail, and once you realize, I guess, what the bar is, you know, sometimes you need to see somebody do something to believe that it's possible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people will walk into the woods and they'll go, "Oh, there's a rub there, there's a scrape there, I saw a track back there," but there's a whole lot more going on than just that, and you have to almost get a sense for it and be able to. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling now, but it's seeing the whole big picture and being able to read sign effectively.
Right. Let's. That's interesting that you say that, because that was one of the things that I don't know if you know my buddy Greg Litzinger. Do you know Greg at
Yep.
all? You do?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
He's New York. Or is he Pennsylvania or New
he's Jersey.
Jersey? Okay.
Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep,
We
yep.
we we
So he's
ain't,
in the salt marshes.
yeah, we ain't owning that fool. Pennsylvania ain't. No, I'm just kidding. He's a good buddy of mine, man. I love that guy. But he's one of those. He's one of those dudes, like you're saying, like with Dan, where he's very much from the school of thought of like the Beast school, right? And
Hmm.
he and I scout a fair amount together. We haven't had a chance to get out this year, but usually once a year we get together and we scout. And it's exactly what you said. It was like picking up the small things that he would notice, and it was actually one of the things that made all the difference for me last year coming into this year, which was he would pick up small little things. I remember maybe you even made a post about this in the not so recent past, or distant past, but I would see a rub, right? And Greg's a big rub guy. I'm more of a scrape person versus a rub person. Just if I was going to prioritize them, I guess. But
Hmm.
what he was really good at is we'd be walking through like a really thick area and he'd be finding like these little tick marks. I would walk right past them. And he would stop me. He's like, there's a good deer that's walking through here. And I'm like looking around. I don't see any rubs. I don't see any beds. Like, I'm like, how do you know? He's like, there's a bunch of tick marks on these trees that are all about like chest high, like all the way through here.
Hmm.
And I went back and started looking, and sure enough, you know what I mean? It was like, and he was like, that's a big deer that's walking through here, getting his antlers caught, right? It was just little
Yep.
things like that. So this year, I found this deer that I was chasing, found a set of rubs that I know for sure was his just based on his antler characteristics. And I was trying to figure out where he was going. I found like his main kind of like where he was laying down the concentration of his sign, but it was like, well, how is he moving through here? And I just started picking up tick marks. And I was like, all right, here you go. I was like, this is where he's at, right? I was like, because as high as the tick marks are, there's really only one deer that I knew that was in that area that could have made those, based on
Right.
the height. And so it was things like that until I saw someone do it, I really didn't put it all together, and
Yes.
and it's just so important that I think people go out and walk with someone who will let them just walk along with them somewhere and watch how they break stuff down, because you will learn a boatload, even if you only take one or two things. And maybe some of the stuff Greg does, like I just don't do, like it doesn't fit my style, but I always pick up one or two things from him anytime that we're out together, and I'm
Yep.
sure that was probably the same, for you kind of walking with Dan, I would imagine.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And we've got two guys that I can think of out here where I live that are local known killers. And I started seeing the bucks that they were knocking down, and I reached out to them and got to know them. And I've intentionally gone on little scouting missions with these guys to see what they see and bounce perspectives around. And I think you look at even Andy May, for example.
Yeah.
He was recently out with what's his name, Lee from Seek One.
Yeah.
And it's a smart. They went out together, did a little scouting, and it's a smart thing to do. Pick. You got two killers there, and they can see what each other sees and learn from each other, and it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like whenever you see football players go into the off season, they're not training with a guy who is lesser. They might train with a guy who's on the come up, but has that desire. Right. And
Yep.
they're always looking for, what's this young guy know, maybe that I haven't picked up on, or maybe I've forgotten, or maybe I've just haven't been paying attention to, You know what I mean? So there's always things to kind of pick up. But I'm curious, just, knowing that you've picked up a ton of stuff from Dan. Of course, a lot of folks can kind of, Dan could probably lay claim to a lot of deer in terms of like helping, right? But how is your approach different than Dan's? Like how, because everyone's slightly different from each other. How do you think that your approach is different than Dan's?
Boy, that's a tough one to answer. We hunt a little bit different terrains. Gosh, that's a tough one to answer.
Yeah.
Because I would say I could ramble off a few things, but I think it's the age difference. I'm able to do things that as you get older, it's hard to do. Gosh, I don't have a good answer for that one. We're very similar in styles. Trying to think. Here we go. One thing I see with a lot of the older guys is as they start to kind of develop their strategy, it gets a little more set in stone, a little more set in stone, a little more set in stone, and they have like a certain style that they believe in. Whereas the mentality that I have and I would like to keep is whenever I have an assumption as to what a deer is doing or what's going on, I like to always just say, hey, this is what I think is happening, but I could be wrong. I always like to assume that I could be wrong. And I feel like it keeps
you honest.
It keeps me honest. And there's something maybe I could say he has more confidence because there's something to be said for having more confidence, but you always have to entertain the idea that what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
And I think as you get older, you get set in certain, you get a certain methodology. So like if you take Andre DeQuisto, for example, if you've ever listened to any of his podcasts, very, very good hunter, but he's made the comment a few times that when I go into the woods and I hunt in a certain way, I know that I did everything the best I could. And that's where it's like, well, but did you? You know what I mean?
Right.
And maybe, Andre's a better hunter than me, so maybe he's onto something there, but I still like to keep an open mind and always assume that there's something better I could have done. I don't know, maybe I took that on a deep dive, but
no, I love that. And I think what you hit on, it was like in the middle of that was the confidence thing. Cause I think that like, if they're really good hunters, like, cause I think we all know a variety of different types, right? We know some guys that are, let's just say older and they're really, really good hunters and they have confidence and rightly so. Cause they have the pedigree to prove it, right? Like they're right more often than they're wrong. Right. And so in that case, it's like, yeah, you've probably earned the benefit of the doubt. Right. But then there are those who maybe don't have quite the pedigree, right? And it's like, man, you would probably really benefit from just making the assumption, like you said, that you maybe don't have this 100% right, and what's the thing that I'm missing,
Correct.
That's really interesting that you say that because Chad actually was out, met up. I think you were there too. Like you went to Ohio too for a couple of days, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And that was the first time I think Chad actually hunted with Dan, if I'm not mistaken. And so I was considering going, I couldn't get away from work and blah, 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 blah. So I ended up not being able to make the trip. But whenever Chad got back, we were talking and I was just, I was curious. I was like, hey, what was spending some time in the woods with Dan like, and I was like, what's the thing that you feel that he did so much differently than maybe you and I were doing that's the difference. And he said basically hit on two of the things you said. He said, one, he can look at the sign and relate it to like the entire picture. Like he kind of knows, like as soon as he sees a few things, he can kind of tell you where a deer is going to be bedded and stuff like that. He said the second thing is that how slow he moves. And so my question for you is like, when you're scouting, how quickly are you moving? And if you do slow down, what makes you slow down?
Yeah, so slowing down is a huge one, and that's one that I can tie back to following some of these other guys, even the local guys around the woods by me. The killers they move slowly and just look around at everything, because if you're moving too fast, you're going to miss details. So I guess in terms of when and where do I slow down, it depends. So like if I'm walking through a big hardwoods and it's big, wide open hardwoods and there's nothing thick around, I'm just scooting through there. I'm moving through there quickly. There's probably not a deer bedded in that particular, let's say it's a flat open hardwoods. There's probably not a deer bedded right in that space. Now I'm trying to get to a spot where a deer might be bedded on an edge looking into that. And then when I get to that edge, that's when I'll slow down. Or say I'm going across a bunch of fields to get into the swamp. I'll fly through the fields, maybe check some fence lines, some little funnels, openings and stuff like that. But then when I get to the swamp, I'm slowing down and reading everything. So it's just you really should move slow and pay attention to everything. Look around, let it all register in your head. Yeah, slowing down is very important. It really is.
It was, and I kind of took that to heart this year for this off season and made a point to, whenever I got into an area that like either felt good or I started kind of picking up a few pieces, pieces of sign or whatever, I would just consciously tell myself, all right, just stop, take a look around. What are you missing? And then I would ask myself literally out loud, like, why is that rub there? Where was he coming from when he made that? Why is it scraped? You know what I mean? Like I would literally go through like the questions and it was surprising to me. And I kind of, I guess, academically know those things, that you should do that, but to actually make myself stop and literally answer the questions, it was really kind of eye opening and helped me understand the bigger picture, of what that deer might be doing in relationship to the other sign that I had seen or have come across, or it illuminated the fact that like, man, you really don't know. Like you thought you knew, but you're asking yourself very pointed questions, and they're not hard if you have the answers, and you just don't have the answers. So now that you don't have the answers, let's take a look at the map. Where do you think you can find them? You know what I mean? And so it was just really, it was a really good kind of piece of advice that Chad was able to pass on to me, and it made that one deer you and I were texting about, I guess whatever it was 2 weeks ago. That's how I ended up finding his bed, was because of that. Okay. Like it was just stopping, pausing, asking questions, and then I ended up finding him some of his sign and had another camera picture of him in another area. So I have actually kind of put the puzzle pieces together over like a larger area that I know that he's using now for sure. And it was basically just stopping and asking myself those questions. So that's awesome, man. Yeah.
And the one thing I caught, I'm sorry, I think I got to sneeze.
Yeah.
The one thing I caught there that you said, I thought I knew, right? Mm-hmm. You thought that goes back to what I had just said earlier with your previous question is there's so many situations where you think, and that can be your kryptonite. Another example of that, you might go into a spot, look at it. You can tell there was a big buck in this spot, throw up some trail cameras, run the trail cameras for a week or two. You don't get a picture of the big buck and you move on. Well, you're confident in yourself that the big buck's not there. Well, guess what? You're actually wrong. The buck is going to be there in 2 more weeks, and you thought you knew, but you didn't. You know what I mean? So I guess that's just a little example of, I think it's so important to walk through the woods and not think all the time. I feel when I ask me when I'm in my 50s and my 60s, maybe I'm going to have my mindset's going to be locked in. I'm going to say, this is how you kill deer. This is how you do it. Nope, I'm 100% confident in myself. There's no other way I could have done it. Maybe I'll talk like that, but I kind of hope I don't. I hope I'm always a student and think that way.
Right. You mentioned something there where like, that deer might be showing up 2 weeks from now or whatever. Like you don't know. So you're wrong. Right. And it made me just kind of think about the question of, cause I think this is, anyone who, especially if you're hunting public land, it's, you're probably the same way. Every off season, I'm looking for new places, right? So it's like I kind of maybe go back and scout the places I had been previously, or maybe that I've hunted previously, or that I've scouted previously, just to kind of confirm, what I thought I knew previously is still there. The sign that I thought I would see is there. It may be shifted a little bit here or there, but like I feel like I kind of know, what I knew previously is still effective, right? So I'll move on and kind of start dissecting some new areas and stuff like that. But the question I always get, and I'm never quite sure how to answer it, is, and I want to ask you this, is when you go to a new spot, let's say for example, that deer, that buck's going to show up 2 weeks from now, and you don't know that, and maybe you don't know that because it's a brand new spot. How long do you typically feel like it takes you in a new area to feel good about putting on some hunts and killing? Like I like to go in and kind of freestyle places myself, as and I know that kind of being mobile, that's kind of like the approach. But if you're breaking a place down and in order for you to feel like you have a good beat on it, about how much time does that take you? Is it like, yeah, I make a 2-year process or a 3-year plan for like, breaking down a new piece of timber, or nope, I'm going to go in and give it hell the first year?
So for me, it has sped up in the last 2, 3 years. I think about the bucks I've killed, and then this past year I killed a good one. The year prior, I ran an arrow through my target buck, and then the year prior I killed a good one. And all three of those bucks were brand new areas, and I was able to get an arrow in them the first year. Prior to that, it was taking me multiple years. So I guess as I learn more and I can compare what's happening in one spot to the next new spot, I'm getting a lot quicker at figuring stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, so like even the buck I killed this year, since I killed it, I've walked that spot 5 times now to continue to try to get the full picture, to try and understand how the deer use it a little bit better. I feel like I'm becoming a little bit more instinctual with spots, but then I need to go back and look at them and set the instincts aside and look at what actually happened, what's actually going on. I guess, does that answer your question?
No, it totally does. Like it makes sense. It's like as you're building like your mental bandwidth, I guess maybe might be one way to say it, right? Things are just coming to you more quickly, and it's like, it's taking less time to discern, where a setup might be. I guess my question is what is helping you get to that kind of speed? Cause I'm scouting a piece that's like 2 hours away from me. It's a big woods piece. It's, I don't know, like 100,000+ acres. Like if you kind of add everything together, and I've kind of taken a chunk of it and just like, all right, I'm going to break this down. Like I started last year and I was like, I'm going to take a piece of it, and it might take me 2 years or 3 years till I feel confident that like I know enough about it that I can feel like I can put on a good hunt, because it's low deer density. There's not a ton of deer there, necessarily. They're super spread out. They've got a ton of room to roam. And so even just finding deer there is tough. So I looked at it going, look, it's probably going to take me 3 years to kind of have the type of hunts I want to have. So my question to you is what do you think it is that's allowing you to kind of speed that process up and be able to go like, yep, I scouted it. I know what I need to do. And now I'm going to go in and kill a deer.
I think it's just experience. I think the more time you spend in the woods, the more you realize and figure out what you can skip over. So like you mentioned, your spot has low deer density.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like as if you might go through a spot and think, okay, maybe this is a good spot, and you're trying to kind of piece it all together, when really you should not be wasting your time in that spot and you should be skipping to the next spot quickly. So it sounds like, in the past, I guess I would go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, where I'm starting to learn what looks good and what spots I can just skip over right away. Mm-hmm. Maybe that answers the question a little bit better. I'm hitting the good spots right away. You can kind of see what they are just based on experiences and running into deer and figuring out where the big ones hide and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't know if that's the right answer, but that's one of
No, that totally makes sense. It's like, yeah, I mean, you just kind of you run through, and if you see good stuff, and then you spend some time. If you don't, then you move on to the next. Do you take the same approach whenever when you're hunting out of state, or is it something slightly different? Like, do you feel that it happens as quickly for you as far as like getting a place dialed in out of state as it does, I guess, in Wisconsin?
Out of state is a little more tricky for me, definitely, because in Wisconsin or around home, I can hammer a spot all spring, get it figured out, and then when the leaves come on, I know what everything looks like, I know what the terrain's like, and I can go from there. Whereas out of state, you're kind of just going in blind. Mm-hmm. And I would say out of state is where I'm more so leveraging other people, leveraging experiences other people have had, locals picking their brain. So yeah, out of state's definitely harder because you don't have all spring and you don't go through the entire season figuring out what's going on. Right. You might have a buck living in a certain spot out of state, and that buck is extremely hard to kill except for during one certain week window, whether that's the first week of the season or whether that's the rut or whether it's late season. Maybe he's got that little certain window where that's when you should be killing him. Well, if you're not there during that window, it's hard to kill him. Whereas at home, you can kind of monitor, and then suddenly it's like, oh shoot, he's killable, and then you move in and kill him. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a little bit more difficult out of state, but you got to use those resources, other people, right. And then you can take all those experiences from back home and apply them
Yeah.
So I'm definitely no professional at the out of state hunts, but I'm getting the hang of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird for me. And it's funny. Greg kind of makes fun of me for this because I actually have actually better encounters, typically, whenever I'm out of state and I don't know anything about a spot. And I think it's because I don't. I think at home I feel like I probably try to thread the needle too much, where I'm trying to be so fine, and so kind of like I've got this dialed in, and as opposed to just kind of hunting free, to a degree. And I feel
Do you
like if
think you're more aggressive out of state or more aggressive
oh,
at home? Where are you
way
more aggressive?
way more aggressive out of state. Yeah,
Okay.
100%, 100%. And part of it is, just being completely candid is whenever I'm going out of state, it's like I'm going to places that have, they're more target rich, areas, than Pennsylvania. It's like, so I'm going to like Missouri or Ohio, or I'm in Kansas or whatever. And so if I, run some deer off, I'm not usually too worried about it. Because I'll find some other ones, Pennsylvania, with just as much pressure as we have, and I'm sure you can, you're familiar with this, I'm sure, you
Yeah.
know, I I will get one crack at a target deer, and if I blow that one opportunity, like I probably won't see him. Not only will I not see him on the hoof again, I will not even see him on trail camera again.
Oh,
And
really?
oh yeah, I had one.
What do you think that is?
I just think it's. I live north of Philadelphia, and there's a ton of hunters in this general area, and the pieces aren't real big, and
Oh,
there's tons of like homes around too. So it's really easy for them to slip in someone's 10 acres that doesn't hunt and hole up and
oh,
never be seen. You know,
okay. So
so
they know how to react to pressure.
yeah, so I'll give you a for example. Like, so this year I was hunting this one deer. There's this awesome spot that I have that I've watched it for, played the long game. Like, I kind of monitored it with trail cameras for 2 years. It's a big community scrape, gets used all year round. And I know that the one of, or it's sometimes maybe it's only one in the area, mature deer in the area is going to daylight for the first time in October on that community scrape between like the 15th and 18th, or 15th to 19th, roughly, right? Like in that 4 day window, when you get the right conditions in that window, the most mature deer on that area will be at that scrape in daylight. He might only give you, on the cusp of dark, like, 10 minutes before dark or whatever, but he will
Right.
be there. And I watched it happen, not this past season, but the season before, and I just mistimed it and missed that deer by like a day, 2 different times. It was a different
Yeah.
deer, but it was the mature deer for the area. And there was one that I had pictures of, nocturnal pictures of in September. Definitely from the body, he was 4.5 years old, and I was like, all right, that's the one. Yeah, that's the big one in the area that he'll daylight on me. I just got to give him time and time that window. And so I think it was like the 16th I showed up, had the right wind, a little overcast, spitting a little bit of rain, and sure enough, he showed up at like 3 o'clock, and I didn't know that it was him at first. He was behind some brush, and I should have drew right away, but I didn't. I was trying to figure out which deer it was because he was a big 8 point, and there was another one that had almost the same kind of frame, just shorter tines and like a year younger, right? And so I was trying to figure out which buck it was, because one wanted to shoot, the other one I was going to let go. And once he popped his head around and I could see which one it was, at that point he was kind of almost head on to me, and I didn't have anything between he and I to get drawn. And he picked me off in the tree. He jumped like what it was 20 yards and just stood there and then just like walked away. Right. So he didn't blow, he didn't freak out, like nothing. He just literally bound, stopped, and stood there for probably like 2 minutes and then just walked away. Never again was he on trail camera, on any of my trail cameras in the area for the rest of the season.
Gosh, that's wild.
Yeah. So it was
Yeah,
that
I guess
one
you
bad.
can't be everywhere though,
What's that?
Like I think it's exactly what you said. If he's living on that private 10-acre piece and you put a little bit of pressure on him and he's sunk into that 10-acre piece and now he's not venturing outside of that,
Hmm.
I guess that makes sense,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And he just completely disappeared. And so for that reason, around here, I'm probably a little bit probably more cautious than I should be, but
Yeah. Hmm.
I should probably go back to pressing the envelope, because truth be told, it was like that one blew up in my face this year. Then last year I glassed a pretty big one up, and I walked in on him on his in his bed and kicked him out of his bed. I was within like 10 yards and never saw him again either. And my season comes in early around here. It's like I think this year was like September 19th. So you can still kind of get on that bed to food pattern, that maybe that first like week and a half, maybe 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And he was coming off of a bean field onto some public, and I was like, man, I was like, I bet he's bedded in this corner. And I walked in there, whatever it was like the opening day or next, like day after opening day. And I mean, I walked right up onto his bed. Like I guessed it right. And I just ended up kicking him out of his bed and then never saw him again. That was it.
Yeah, see that we have the same opener, and that I've seen quite a bit. So you get them even on public land where they're bedding right off the fields. They might not be getting out to the field in legal
Hmm.
light, but they're bedded right off the fields. And the moment they realize that they're being hunted, they've got their fall ranges where they sink down into. So yeah, I'm sure like for that deer for you is around there somewhere, but
Hmm.
he's got his spot where he feels safer when pressure's on, and I'm gonna guess and say he didn't realize the season was on. He didn't realize, he's probably been through it for a few years, and
Yeah.
the moment he got tipped off, he was like, okay, now it's time to go into my protective secure mode.
Yeah. And that time of year, it's like I'm okay with getting super aggressive around here because the chances of him transitioning to his fall range and me not necessarily having a beat on that deer particularly is pretty high. You know what I mean? Because once he
Mhm.
transitions, is he going to be anywhere that I might be? I don't know, maybe a 10% chance, you know? So
Right.
I'm willing to press the envelope on those. But when we get into October and I know what deer I'm going to have around, then I'm like, all right, I got to be strategic here and be kind of hunt with some precision. Because if I make a really bad move, like it's going to basically blow up a spot, you know, and
Right. Right.
just don't have a lot of them, in this general area that I can get away from pressure and things of that nature. But
Cool.
so I want to transition into kind of talking a little bit about the terrain that you hunt specifically because I think I hunt some similar stuff and I've been kind of wanting to pick your brain about it a little bit. But before we do, just I guess tell me about the terrain that you are hunting in the general area. I mean, Wisconsin, I'm sure it's swampy, hill country. So what kind of area of Wisconsin, like, or what type of terrain are you dealing with in the area that you live?
Yeah. So on my side or around where I live, what a lot of it is it's a bunch of old farmsteads that the Department of Natural Resources bought up. In a lot of cases, they bulldoze the houses. Some of them are actually still standing.
Hmm.
But they get rid of the houses and then just turn the farms into public land. So you get a lot of what used to be a hay field 15, 20 years ago is now turned into a brushy area. Or what used to be a little fence line is a big overgrown fence line that maybe a deer's bedding in. So it's like a lot of overgrown old farms, and you find apple trees in unique spots because of that. Um, you find some unique things because of that. But then we also do have, for us, they call it the kettle moraine. So you got some kettles, you got some rolling hills,
Hmm.
but those kettles get hit really hard by your I guess you'd call them entry level hunters,
Hmm.
and then your squirrel hunters, and then your hikers, and you get people up from Chicago and Milwaukee, the walkers. So you get get a lot of people in those. And then we do have the swamps, and it seems any deer that's survived and lived for a decent amount of time around here, they either it's either because of the swamps or there's a few refuges around here like state parks and stuff like that where they know they can live and get big. So that's why I do end up in swamps quite a bit for that reason. Now, if you get on the western side of our state, it's bluff country out there, hill country, really aggressive, steep hills, and they've got much better genetics out there. They got much higher scoring deer.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the difference. And then if you go up north, you get the big woods deer. They don't get as big of antlers. So it's kind of what I'm dealing with.
Right. So what do you, as far as how you split your time between those different types of terrain, what do you think that percentage split would be?
Oh boy, it's it's changed over the year. Well, I shouldn't say it's changed.
Would you say a majority of it's spent in swamps or is it pretty?
Not, I'd say 50-50. I go wherever the deer is, I guess, because I'm always kind of hunting a target buck.
Hmm.
And in a lot of cases, what happens is you'll find a buck, you'll shine him, you'll trail cam him, you'll glass him, and you follow back to where he's living, and he's living back in a swamp. And that's how I end up in the swamps a lot of times.
Got it.
But some of these other deer, like the one I killed this year, he was living in big woods. I mean, I found his track, and that's where he was living, so that's where I hunted him. But it's just kind of how it works. We had another big one. I actually talked when Chad from Exodus Trail Cameras was over at the house. We did a podcast, and I talked about an 8-pointer. This 8-pointer, as a 3-year-old, was living down in the swamp. I had his bed found. It was interesting. You could tell every day he stood up and he pooped in the same spot, and he had a big heaping pile of poop in this little bed in the swamp. And then I thought, excuse me, my voice is getting hoarse. But then I thought, as a 4-year-old, he's going to be easy to kill. So I put up a wireless trail camera over the top of his bed, and he came into it at one point finally as a 4-year-old this year. One time, and it was kind of I don't know, I think it was like an hour or two after dark, and he stood in the bed for about a half hour, never laid down, moved on, and then I found where he was living. He was living outside of the swamp, up on a hillside, watching people, and they actually drove him off that hill and killed him during the gun deer season. So it's a matter of where they want to live, and it's, I don't want to be the guy that says I need to be in swamps, and then here the thing was living up on a hillside, and that's where I could have killed him.
Right.
So I found myself in a lot of swamps, but you got to take all that into consideration.
Right. It sounds like you end up in swamps almost by default in certain instances, just because that's where the best cover is, and that's where people are least willing to go. So,
Correct.
Right. So it makes sense.
Yep.
So that deer you killed this year, you said, so did you find him exclusively by just finding a big track and being like, all right, that's a big deer, let me try to figure out what's going on here? Or did you end up seeing him, shining or on a trail camera picture, or, how did you end up finding him?
Yeah, so I started scouting a new area, just walking at spring scouting, and I found some big rubs, and the big rubs caught my attention, but everything gets hit so hard around here, there's no saying that the deer is going to be alive yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kept scouting this spot, and then one day as I was walking back to the car, I found a big track in the gravel where he had crossed the road, and I was like, oh shoot, this thing's alive yet. So then I threw up a trail camera, got the first photo of him, and it was go time from there. It was a lot of summer scouting, a lot of in-season scouting, put on a crazy amount of miles to try and figure out what he was doing.
So how did you go about figuring him out in terms of like, what did the summer scouting, like where were you looking? What were you looking for to try to pinpoint him?
So where he was I want to know where he was bedding, obviously.
Right.
In the summer I started with a lot of glassing. So I hung, I don't saddle hunt much, but I did use the saddle quite a bit in for summer glassing. The saddle works slick because you can kind of get out on tree branches because everything's green. You got to be able to kind of see through stuff. So I did a lot of that glassing with the saddle in the summer. And then I did a lot of just tearing through the woods, just keep scooting, keep moving. And I actually found some of his rubs in the summer from the previous year. And I set up a trail camera, his little pinch point where he was going through where these rubs were. And I started getting him every single morning. I would get a picture of him. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be simple. I'll be able to kill this thing when the season opens. And of course the season opened or right around Velvet Shed, he went to his fall range. And then it was back to just spending time tearing through the woods and trying to find some sign of him. And it was hard because the big ones around here, you don't see him leaving a lot of sign in the early season. He wasn't, just guessing, he wasn't laying down sign until I would say mid to end of October is when he started rubbing and scraping a little bit more. He needed the rut to get him all ramped up.
Yeah, that's crazy because I mean, I don't know. I'm curious if you kind of see this, because what I've kind of noticed is just like, especially around here, like the big deer. I'll put it this way: whenever I've traveled to, like, whether it's Ohio or hunt in Iowa or whatever it is, it's like I end up finding sign laid down in significant sign. Usually at that, or Missouri was another place where it's just like the sign was just tore up. I'll know around here, let's say, like, that there's a good deer, but I mean, to find his, like, he just does not, like, the one deer specifically this year just was not laying down sign. Like, he was hitting scrapes early. I actually sent you that video. Like, I mean, he was hitting scrapes in September, and I'll send you another one. I had him actually bedding in that scrape. But as far as like rubs or anything like that, it was almost like he was a ghost. Like, he just would not. So this past, like this off season, I ended up finding a bunch of his rubs. I mentioned the tick marks earlier. I found one of the beds that he was using, which confirmed, I thought he was bedded in 2 different areas. And the one I confirmed, the other one I can't really, because it's the neighbors, but I have a really good, or it's private, and he's not bedded right along the edge. So I can't see the bed, like, as I'm walking kind of by it. I think he's kind of further in on the neighbor's property. But other than where his bed is at, that is the only place that I found any of his rubs, and I found a signpost rub that was not far from like a coming off that community scrape, a small scrape line that leads to yet another community scrape. So, do you kind of see the same thing where it's like some of these mature deer that are living in these pressured areas just are not laying down sign? They're almost phantoms.
Yes, I 100% see that. Um, Once in a while you'll get an outlier that rubs a fair amount, but that's exactly what I see. And I always wondered, I made a post the other day. A guy brought up a term, artificial selection, and
Hmm.
that part of me wonders is, you get these high pressure spots. If you get a big buck that starts laying down sign, he's got the characteristics, the personal mental traits or whatever to lay down big sign. That buck eventually gets killed because there's hunters reading that and moving in on him. Now you got a buck that's not laying down sign, and he's not getting killed because of it. So he's breeding more. So I that's one thing I thought about. And then the other thing is it just because there's not all the competition of other deer? I think that's probably more like it. They don't have that competition where they have
Hmm.
to get aggressive and worked up.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. And then again, are we the sign when we go to Missouri or when we go to Ohio, that sign that we're reading where it's all tore up? Why is that happening? Right.
Right. Right.
I see the exact same thing.
Yeah.
That was,
It's interesting because the idea of breeding out that disposition
yes.
that's an interesting that's an interesting thought. I would probably agree with you where I would feel it's probably more in line with, you know, I don't know how it is, where you're at in Wisconsin, but in Pennsylvania, specifically this area, the deer density is pretty good. So there's a fair amount of deer, but you don't get a lot of mature deer, and so it's like,
Mhm.
I might have one 4.5 year old a year that I know of, like in the general area that I'm able to chase. Right. And so
Yeah.
with that,
Yeah.
is he just dominant to the point to where he doesn't have real competition, and that
Right.
he's just not laying it down because there's not really, except whenever he decides to get fired up for the rut, and that's it. I don't know. It's like, and it just baffles me because it just adds another layer of complexity hunting high pressured areas whenever they don't lay down sign. Like they're really hard to kill then.
Right. And then you have those big bucks too. They'll leave sign everywhere except for their beds. You you
Yes.
you you jump them out of their beds or whatever, and there are no rubs around. And with that, it's as if the buck knows he's leaving a visual. He doesn't want to leave a visual where he needs his security. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
guessing here,
I know.
but
It's like, and then I'm like, I try to talk myself out. I'm like, it's a freaking animal. Like it's a deer. He doesn't reason. Like he, you know what I mean? Like but
I would argue that.
right.
Sometimes I swear
I
I would
know.
argue that.
I know, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I've been places, where I had deer on camera that were not in Pennsylvania but out of state, where that were, Boone and Crockett caliber, and there was one particular spot that I think we had 3 or 4 deer that were all like 160 and over, and any of the sign you would see in that area, you would swear it was a forky making all the sign.
Mm-hmm.
There was no big sign at all anywhere. But I had trail camera data that said that there were giants, and it just,
Weird.
yeah, it's just, it makes something that's already extremely difficult that much more difficult. But
Yep.
speaking
Yep.
of trail cameras, man, how are you using trail cameras? Like, are you using it kind of like real time data, like within season, like you want that, intel to kind of help make a plan or to confirm a plan, or are you more of a, I'm going to set cameras and I'm going to kind of play the long game and get some longitudinal data and kind of start to understand what deer are doing around specific dates and areas and things of that nature?
Yeah, if you ask me this question next week, I'll probably give you a different answer because my opinion is, but I guess I would say it's a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
It's a little bit of figuring out what they're doing. It's a little bit of direction of travel. So like I look at the deer that I killed this year, and at one point I got a picture of him and I got his direction of travel, and I was able to confirm that he was still a killable deer because of that. It's a little bit of I've been sticking cameras over the top of deer's big bucks beds once I find them, and I've gotten some interesting photos
Hmm.
and learned some interesting things with that. Part of it is just a learning tool. Just it's I'm acting like a whitetail biologist, I guess.
Right.
Putting it on a signpost rub, putting it on a scrape, putting it over a bed, just to see what the deer are doing and how they're behaving in those certain situations. And then like I've got another deer that I hunted not this past winter, but the not this current winter, but the previous winter, where I was running wireless cameras to try and get a beat on what this deer was doing, and he didn't have a pattern. He was kind of sporadic. So I guess I've used them for everything
Hmm.
ultimately.
What do you think? That's interesting, hanging them over a bed. Like, what's the interesting tidbit that you've kind of picked up from placing a camera over a bed? Because I'm strongly thinking about this on that bed that I of that deer that I really want to kill that I found this off season. Because I think I even mentioned this when you and I were texting. It's one of those spots where if that deer is dead, the next best deer is likely going to move into that because there's not a ton of bedding opportunities in and around there. So that's probably like a pretty, and there's a bunch of historical rubs in there as well. So it tells me that there's just bucks that typically want to use it in general. So what is the one thing that you found really, really interesting from hanging cameras over beds?
Well, I guess let me ask you a question first. Like with that bed, for example,
Yeah.
is does he have to? Okay, so you put your trail camera way high up at a tree, you point it down at the bed. Does he have to lay right there, or can he lay 15 yards to the right, 10 yards to the left, 5 yards back? Can he? What's that look like?
He's got to kind of lay right there. He doesn't
Okay,
if he moves too far, it's so thick in there, like that's really the only spot he could potentially lay. If he moves too far one way or the other, he's going to start to kind of expose himself a little bit because the way it kind of works is like there's there's like very clear kind of exit trail that's there that like opens up almost immediately coming off of that bed. So he's kind of at the edge of like some really thick stuff to where he can already kind of see out any kind of movement in one direction, I guess south or east or west too much is going to start to expose him. The only place he could move would be further north, but that's just going to be, I mean, it's a mess. Like there's nowhere for him to
okay,
really bed any further north.
okay. Yeah, and that's the tricky part. You have to have a bed like that if you're going to put a camera over a bed because like where I killed my buck this year, he could be laying 15 yards to the left, the right, whatever. So you can't put a camera over a bed like that. And that's where I end up putting them in swamps, for example,
Hmm.
and then where they have to lay on that specific bog. And it's just what I'm finding is either the camera scaring them or it's not as consistent as you might think. They'll be in there for a day, maybe 2 days in a row, and then they're out of there. I'm sure there's those beds or there's those really old bucks that will just lay in the same spot for a great portion of the season, but it's just I'm not seeing the consistency that you would anticipate.
Hmm.
I think they have more good beds than we realize sometimes,
It's interesting you say
and
that.
that's
Did you see the recent post that MSU Deer Lab posted about buck beds?
no.
Oh man,
What's that
I'll
about?
have to find it and share it with you. I'd love to have these guys back on the show to talk about this specifically. I just haven't had a chance to reach out to them, but they essentially had a deer collared, and I can't remember if it was on public or private or bordering both. I don't think it really makes that big of a difference, but what they were looking at was a buck's bedding behavior. I want to say from like let's just say like early season, whatever we want to, however we want to kind of define that, like through the rut, right? Because the idea is like what they were basically saying is that most bow hunters, especially if they want to hunt beds, kind of get the idea or the understanding that the best time to do that is early in the year when they move less because once they start moving more, they will use more and more beds essentially, and in earlier part of the year they use fewer beds, so you have a better likelihood of being at the right bed at the right time. And basically, if I'm remembering correctly, what it basically said was is that they actually used more beds, if I'm not mistaken, like earlier in the season, and actually were a little bit more consistent as it got into pre-rut and rut. And they actually used the bed of this the whole time they followed them. No bed. I don't think there was any one bed that got used more than twice in that time frame.
Oh, okay.
And so my
Gee.
my takeaway was that they are not in those beds that we think that they're in as often as we want to think that they're in. And that was I
I would
think
agree.
that was the point that they were kind of making was that like it can still be effective, right? But it's like that deer that buck bed that you found that's worn to the ground,
Yep.
it might be five different bucks that are using that. You know what I mean? Or
Yep.
whatever the case is, because that one deer might only bed in that twice in the next 3 months.
Yep. Yep. But did they say how old that deer was?
I'd have to look at the post, man, because I had a lot of the same questions that I think are probably running through
Yeah.
your mind. You know what I mean? I was like, all right, well,
Yeah.
what's the pressure around there? You know, and
Yeah.
how old is this buck? And were there any other environmental reasons why he would be moving? You know, just all the typical stuff we as hunters would
Right.
ask. But I want to say he was probably like 3.5 or 4.5, if I
Okay.
remember correctly. But I'll try to find the post and send it to you, because I immediately kind of thought of you whenever I was looking at that, knowing that you and I were going to be talking. Because I was like, man, that's really interesting. Like they, you know, it just kind of debunks some of what we kind of think. And so when you start thinking about your strategy, it's like, you know, it almost becomes, because I hear guys talk about this, because I like to try to find beds and hunt them, but I'm not a great bed hunter. I'm more of a I play the long game with my trail camera data, and I actually will hunt dates more so than anything. Like I'll know, like I'd mentioned, that one deer within this 4 day window, the mature buck in the area is going to come across this primary scrape, and I might set up on that scrape, or I might set up in a pinch off of it or whatever, but I'm going to be in that area, you know? Um,
So you might be seeing a side effect of exactly what that study is showing, right? So if
exactly.
he's
Yep.
hitting that scrape, maybe he's only 100 yards off that scrape, and you're seeing him in there in that 2 day window. It's because he's in that bedding area for 2 days, hits the scrape, and then he's on to the next. So
In
you might be seeing exactly what they
yes, that would
studied. But
yeah
but then
that
again, I'd argue. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, and that's kind of what I'm playing, is because I'm not a great bed hunter, like of finding a bed and like hunting a specific bed, where it's like I will hunt in and around like some of the prime sign that's adjacent to an area in which I'm pretty sure that I know that they're bedding in. And that bedding area might be an acre, it might be 2 acres, 3 acres, 5 acres, whatever it ends up being. I might know that, like, hey, I know that there's a buck that's bedded in there. I don't know exactly where, but I'm pretty confident this, based on the wind and him wanting to leave that area, he's going to have to come this way. And this is a prime destination for him to want to stop by. And that's kind of how I play
Yeah.
that.
Yep. Yep. But I think when you talk about a buck like that, gosh, I wonder, you hear people talk about the nomadic buck, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if that's kind of what we're talking is a buck who's a nomad, because then I've had other bucks where because of situations that happen, I know that they were in a specific bed quite often, whether it was pictures of them coming out from that bedding area or whether it was me going in and blowing them out or encounters. So, I don't want to say that's all deer,
Right.
that all bucks are doing that, but that is definitely an interesting study.
Yeah, yeah. I know. I'm
Right.
curious. I think they're going to drop some more stuff about it. I think they're kind of teasing. I think they have like a few more things
Wow.
they're going to kind of put out about it. And so I'm kind of anxiously waiting to see what else they kind of what else they drop about it, because I just thought it was fascinating. I was like, and the thing was too is that kind of what you had mentioned, like the bedding area, like you would see, because they had all the beds kind of mapped, right? And
Yeah.
and I forget what the criteria was for however long the deer stopped or whatever the case was. Like sometimes he'd be in a bed, for an hour, or sometimes it'd be 2 hours. But I don't think it was ever any longer than like, and this might even be long, but like I don't think it was any longer than 4 hours. He was ever in any one bed.
Yeah. Yep. So I had a buck 2 years ago. It was the one I talked about it on. Where did I talk about it? Where was the video? I think on the video with Chad from Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the Whitetail Cribs video. There was a little snippet of it. But I had a buck. I had him going into I had the camera over his bed since before the season, and his sign was in there from him as a 3-year-old. And I thought he was using it quite a bit based on the sign. You could see a rub line going right up to the bed. The bed was beat down quite well. And I ran a trail camera over the bed, and he didn't hit it until I don't remember the date off the top of my head. It was like that last week of October. And it was like, I think it was like 4 hours before dark when he walked into the bed and triggered the wireless trail camera.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly ran out to the tree, got set up. I was only 80 yards from him. And the camera, every time he would stand up and sit down, the camera would trigger. He did a lot of standing up and sitting down. So I could always confirm that he was still only 80 yards from me. And then it's pretty terrible, but I mean, it's the reality of the situation. But then he came in and it was too dark. It was after legal light. And then the very next day, he went back into that bed, and he got into the bed. I would say it was like at 10 o'clock in the morning. So he was somewhere moving around in the swamp and didn't hop in there until 10 o'clock. And then he was in there for like 2 or 3 hours, and suddenly I got a picture of him standing up, looking in one direction, and then a suddenly he was, I think, was he turned around or something, and then a few seconds later there was a picture of a coyote. So a coyote bumped him out of that bed, and then I got no more pictures of him in that bed as a 4 year old.
Hmm.
And then I relocated him a little ways away, and then ran an arrow through him a little high. But that's kind of the same thing, right? He was only
Mhm.
in it for a few hours. The one time he got bumped, obviously, by a coyote, and it was a 2 day window. And I feel like that coyote bumped him out of there, and he was like, "Nope, this is no longer safe." Just think, you get harassed by a coyote in your bed. Are you going to want to go back to that bed and get possibly harassed by that same coyote tomorrow and the next day and next week? Probably not. You're going to want to move on to the next spot and stay unpredictable. So I'm thinking that's what he was doing.
Right. Or you could also say the inverse of that, which is that that bed worked because I got out of there.
Yes. Yes.
So therefore I should continue to use it because I know I can
Yeah.
escape.
Yes.
You
Yep.
know,
No, you got a good point.
it's like,
Exactly right.
yeah, I mean, dude, that's why we love bow hunting because there's so many possible answers and they're all plausible, right? It's like
Yes. And
there's
we'll never be able to. They'll
no,
never
exactly. The only thing we'll ever know is that when we run an arrow through one is like he was right here, right now. Like, you know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yep. Exactly.
that's
Unless you
it.
put a collar on.
Right, exactly. Which, man, I would love. I would love to. I mean, I don't know, man. Those colored deer studies are just so cool. And I've actually started. I mean, I use the Spartan Forge app or whatever. And one of my favorite things about it is that the data they have around like their movement data is all from collared deer data in your area.
Oh, okay.
So what I started doing, I mentioned this on another podcast, so I won't kind of be long winded about it, but essentially it'll show you like, is it a transition area day? Is it a core area day? Or is it like a full range day? It's kind of how it breaks it down. And, you know exactly what that means. A transition area means he's not far outside of like his bedding area, but it's probably like a food source that's nearby or something like that, or whatever the case is, right? And it's on average, like deer in your area on average will do this based on the weather conditions, et cetera, et cetera, and on the collared deer data that we have, and kind of aggregated with the weather of those dates, right? So that's kind of how it works. But the one thing I picked up from my buddy Greg, the way he uses it is kind of looks at those transition days and those movement pattern days, and then takes a look at his trail camera data and kind of marries it up to know whether or not that trail, to confirm that, like, he'll have a camera set, for example, and he'll say, all right, I set it up, right, on the cusp of a bedding area, right? Like I'm right, like literally 60 yards, 70 yards from like the bedding area, right? But then whenever he goes back and looks at his trail camera data and looks at the movement days, if he consistently gets movement on transition days, he knows that, like, okay, I'm probably a little further away from the bedding than I thought. That's probably a transition area. And he's able to start to
Okay.
correlate it back to like his trail camera data, confirming with what the predictive kind of modeling is telling him the movement should be. And it kind of tells him where he's actually at. So it's like, and then if it's like daylight pictures nonstop and it's on core area days, it's like, man, then I'm in the chips. Like I'm in the bedroom with this setup. And so
Sure.
that's a really that's one thing that I really kind of like about how he uses it. And it's something I'm going to start doing this year to kind of make sure I'm kind of, because how many times do you think you're in a core area and maybe you're just right outside the game and you're actually in a transition area? You know what I mean? But you don't know that until you go sit it, you see it, you check your trail cameras, and you kind of figure it out on your own, as opposed to being able just to kind of look and kind of map it in real time.
Correct. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. But man, I was curious, because I know you hunt, like you mentioned, swamps, hill country, bluff country, or if you will. What is the biggest difference for you in your approach to hunting either one of those?
The biggest difference between, say, swamps or dry land, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or hunting hills, or whatever the case is. What is it about your approach that you have to change the most whenever you're kind of going between those two different types of terrain?
A pair of waders.
Nice.
Yeah, gosh.
I mean, do you approach them the same? Is it tactically kind of the same for the most part? Maybe you have to. Maybe you're. I'm just making shit up here, but maybe the way you have to play thermals is a little bit different, or is it basically all kind of the same for you?
That's what I was going to touch on. Wind and thermals in the swamps. It's flat.
Hmm.
So you kind of take into consideration your prevailing wind. Your prevailing wind might be a little different when you actually get out there, but there's a fair amount of consistency unless you're getting into like some cedars and some tamaracks where the wind's kind of like working through openings and doing funny things. But there's a little bit more consistency with the wind in those swamps versus the moment you get into onto the dry land and you got a little hill or a little valley or a little draw or whatever it might be, then you have to start taking into consideration all those different things.
Hmm.
um, I feel like based on just my experience at this point in my life, it's almost easier if you got a buck living on dry land. It's almost easier to kill them on dry land, um, and take into consideration all of those funky winds than it is to go into the swamp and get it done. Um, yeah,
Why is that?
I don't. It seems like in the swamp, it's almost kind of a one and done because the deer in the swamps are they're not getting harassed by people.
Mm.
So if you go in that morning, you set up, you're expecting him to come in, and maybe he heard you trudging through the swamp that morning, which can happen because it's hard to be quiet in the swamps.
Yeah.
Maybe he heard you trudging in. He was just sitting on. I'll see it a lot where they'll sit on the field edge, the edge of the swamp and the edge of the field. They'll sit on the edge, and then they'll move just inside the swamp during that first hour of darkness, and then once it gets light, they'll move all the way to the back of the swamp to their beds. So when you access in the swamps, a lot of times you got to take that into consideration with how you're accessing. He might not be that far from you. He might just be sitting there, and then he's going to move back to you when it gets light.
Mm.
Now I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but
No, that makes
that,
sense.
you have to take that in consideration. Whereas like in the more open country, I'm sure the same things are happening, but it's a little you can access however you want. Whereas like in the swamps, you're limited by can you get through? Is there a big tangle of cattails you can't get through there? Is there a bunch of blowdowns you can't get through there? Whereas on the dry land, you can usually kind of get through in different ways.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned access because there was one particular swamp that I've really liked to hunt around here. And the first year I ever hunted it, I thought for sure I was going to kill a hammer. There was a deer that was in there that was, he was like borderline 150 inches, and there was probably two others that were like in the 30s. Like it was ridiculous. It was a small little swamp, and I just kind of like on a whim threw a camera in it, and these three deer showed up, and but the access for that spot, there was literally one way in and one way out. That was it. And
Yeah.
and uh and they were bedded in the places you would predict because of that only one entry and one exit. You know what I mean? Which made it like
Yep.
nearly like you either had to get in super early and just wait it out and try to beat them back to bed, and sometimes that would work, and if you didn't, when you were leaving, you were going to blow them out when you were leaving. So you basically got one good
Yep.
hunt out of it all year, and that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Now with that spot, the way it laid out, how was the like for a night sit? How
Mhm.
was the prevailing wind? Was it okay? Or could you with your most typical prevailing wind? How are those beds set up?
Man, it was, put it this way, like you're prevailing, if it was going to be good to actually hunt where they were going. So there was two places they were going to bed. They were either going to bed at the very entrance, which I've kicked bucks up as I was walking in, right? And the typical prevailing would have been fine for the wind to walk in for your access. It was fine, right? But they're going to be bedded right there close, so you were kind of screwed. If you The other area they would bed was like a little further back in, maybe, I don't know, it was probably, maybe it was a small swamp, so it was maybe only like 200, 300 yards further back in, and your prevailing would be great for access to get in, but it was horrible for where they were bedded. I mean, you could play,
Mhm.
you could quarter the wind a little bit, but it was going to be pretty dicey. So I mean, the way they bedded in there, it was almost set up for them to be bulletproof. Like either your access was going to
Yeah.
be crap, and if the wind was right for access, it was almost going to be 100% wrong to hunt it where they were going to eventually come from.
Yeah. So they've had those experiences being messed with people, and they
Hmm.
were set up appropriately for it. It sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. There was one bed I found in there that was kind of in an oddball spot, and I hunted it a couple different times over the course of a couple different seasons. I never once saw a deer come out of that spot ever. It was always, there was this small little like bend in this stream that kind of created it was not really an oxbow, but just like this little, I don't know, like slough that they would kind of want to bed back in like on the edge of it. And that's usually where I would want to set up, because it was just like, if you could get the right wind and you could get in there quiet enough and you could cut the wind just enough, if you got them to kind of, I guess, come out the exit trail of that bedding area, it was almost a slam dunk, because they were not going to see you before it was too late. But one kind of flip of the wind the wrong way, and you were, an hour into your hunt, like you were done. Like you just blew out the whole bedding area. Like they know you're there. You know what I mean? Yep. So it was,
happens a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, the only way you would really want to hunt that is if you had a really, really stiff prevailing, a windy day. That would be basically like the best day to hunt it, because you could use a little bit of cover sound getting in, and you'd be pretty sure that the wind wasn't going to, flip on you with a stiff wind. But otherwise it was nearly impossible. I still put a camera in it every year, and I hunt it maybe once a year. I do that one hunt. I go in and I just, kind of throw the Yahtzee dice and see what happens.
But. So then my next question, what kind of swamp was that? Is that the kind of swamp where if you scoot up in a tree, it's very possible they can see you up in that tree from their beds because the swamp's so naked, there's so few of trees? Or was it like a thick cedar tamarack type swamp?
No, it's really
that's the next problem.
Right. No, it's really kind of weird. Like there's not a ton of cedars. Well, when you first enter, it is, and it's just like a lot of swamp grass, but there's plenty of trees and cover in there. And then like, I guess off to it'd be your east, just like a ton of cattails and just like, I don't know what it is, but like this just gnarly brush and like viney kind of thorny trash. It just kind of grows all along the edge of that swamp, essentially. Right. And then it kind of opens up into like almost like an area that looked like it had been flooded out in the past. And it's just like a ton of deadfall and just like a bunch of small skinny ass trees. It's not like a tamarack swamp or anything like that. There's really not any cedars. It's just like, I don't know. I just call it trash wood. Like, I don't know. It's not like, there's no oak trees in there or anything like that. So it's not like there's anything good for them to like necessarily eat. So it's not like you can play that game in there necessarily. There are, I guess, some sweeters along the edge of the swamp, but it just kind of opens up into this like mess of something that looked like it had been flooded out like over the course of time, and just like a shit pile of deadfall. Okay. And then you get back to like where that stream kind of bends, and then it just turns into just like a swamp grass kind of brushy nightmare. Like, and that's typically one of the spots that they want to bed in is there. And then there's a neighboring property, like, off to the north. And it's just basically just hardwoods then, because there's a little bit of elevation. It kind of goes up and it kind of cleans up.
Right. And see, with those swamps, one thing I always think about is, like I was saying, is it's not as thick as the hardwoods or whatever else. And you get up in a tree and you look in the direction of their bed and you're like, no, they can't see me. But if you go sit down in their bed, they can see hunters get up in the trees. Mm-hmm. And a story, I guess I'll tell. It's not my story. My buddy Justin Wright, a few people have heard of him. He's a hell of a killer from Missouri. Yeah. He had a buck that he was hunting, and every day he drove by and there were cars in the parking lot every single day. He kept driving by, cars in the parking lot. And one day there was nobody there. And I don't remember if he said he got dropped off or he parked his car further down the road. But he went into the spot. He knew there was a big buck in there. All these people were hunting it. But the one day when nobody was hunting it, he went in there and he stayed on the ground. The buck came out at last light and he shot it. And this buck had been hunted every night. But the buck was sitting there watching all the hunters climb up in the trees. They'd climb down. They'd leave. The buck would come out. Well, that night, the buck didn't see anybody climb up in the trees. So he came out and Justin shot it.
Oh, man.
So that's a swamp scenario too, where there's a lot of scenarios like that where you can sit in your tree, you look and you go, oh, he can't see me. But he can, and you got to take that into consideration.
Yeah. So maybe I'll do that this year, man. I haven't tried that yet. That's about the only thing I haven't tried. I'm not saying
that's what you're doing wrong. What's that?
That's about the only thing I haven't tried in that spot.
Sure. Yep. No, I'm not saying it's something you're doing wrong, but it's just something to think about.
Yeah, it was
a problem I've run into.
The first year I hunted it, I got covered in poison ivy. It was awful. Like, it was so bad. Yeah. And I thought, man, if I had to put a percentage on it, just based on, I was getting daylight pictures of these bucks at like noon, and then they'd pop back out at 2, and then they'd pop back out at like 4. Like, I was just getting daylight activity from them like nonstop. And I was like, dude, I was like, this is like a slam.
Jeez.
I was like, this is a slam dunk. I was like, I'm gonna go in, slip in, and I was like, as long as I get a wind I can work, I was like, I'm gonna go in and kill one. And the tree that I needed to be in, that was like the quintessential killing tree, was covered in poison. I was so confident. I was like, I don't care. I was like, I'm climbing this tree. It has poison all over it. I was like, because I'm gonna kill this deer tonight, and I won't have to worry about the poison the rest of the season. And
It's gonna be worth it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Did not happen. I ended up at the doctor's office getting a steroid shot in my ass from all the poison I had. So that's how.
Oh, it's so bad you had to get a shot, huh?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was pretty bad.
I've not,
What's that?
I've had that. I've not had to get a shot, but I've had plenty of prednisone for poison ivy and sumac and whatnot.
Oh man,
But I've
yeah,
never had to get a shot. So you in bad shape.
yeah. I had to get the shot, and I was on prednisone for however long. I had to do 2 rounds of it. It was that bad. Like it just was not going away. It was
Oh,
it was ridiculous. Man, what's your favorite time of year to hunt? Like if you had to pick like a window of time, like because I know you as a bed hunter primarily. Like I would always just presume it would be sometime in that early October timeframe. But when's your favorite time to be chasing a buck?
yeah. So previously, I always said it was the first week of the season, and now my opinion's changed on that because we get so much. I've killed good ones in the first week, but that was 5 6 years ago. And now that there's more pressure, seems like there's a lot of people in the woods, and all those early season bucks are kind of getting booted into their fall ranges quickly.
Mm.
And now I'm starting to have a lot of my success. That the first week in November, I guess, kind of like everybody else,
Hmm.
I look at my oldest bucks and the bucks that the ones that weren't just luck, the ones where I went in and did what I wanted to do. It was that kind of the more first week or two of November. You hear so many people talk about the buck they're after is out cruising. He's gone. I can't find him. Whatever. And yeah, I see that. I see that more so with 2 and 3 year olds. But my 2 3 oldest bucks, they're still very patternable. They're just more vulnerable. So like I talked about that buck that I was getting the trail cam pictures of over his bed. That buck, it was the last week of October, and he didn't make it to me in daylight. He didn't make it 80 yards in daylight. But then you fast forward, it was like a week and a half, and the sun hadn't even hit the tree line yet. I had him in a different bedding area, and he came out and offered me a shot. So prior to that, I couldn't even work with him. I would have had to have snuck up to him in his bed and shot him that way. I couldn't do anything with it. Whereas once you fast forward a week and now you got a daylight walker and you can kill him.
Right.
So I guess I would say that first, second week in November is starting to be one of my favorites, but I'll take them when I can get them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it kind of it kind of plays into what that MSU study was kind of saying too. That they're a lot more predictable than we think they are, in that, pre-rut kind of time frame.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I think there's something to it too. Like when you mentioned like 2 and 3 year olds, yeah, they're out doing a lot of moving. I was just talking to someone about this the other day, where what kind of drove it home for me was there was a particular spot that had a pretty good scrape. That was it was a community scrape area, and we'd have these bucks show up like every so often, just kind of randomly, and then like you just wouldn't see them for like a while, and I was like, man, they got to be around here somewhere. Went in and scouted the next year, and just this scrape was kind of up in this like old log yard landing type of area, and then it kind of drops off the back side. So it's not really a ridge necessarily. It's just where the topography just kind of falls off right off the back side of that log yard. Well, when I was
Yep.
scouting, I kind of did this big loop around, and I was coming back up toward that scrape because that was kind of the entrance, like from where I parked, and came across the bed that was maybe 60 yards down the other side of that drop off below that scrape. And the prevailing wind and a dropping thermal, like in the morning, would drop anything that had hit that scrape into that bed in the morning, or anything that was going to walk by. And
Oh, okay.
that was whenever I started thinking. I was like, man, because I've heard people say it, and I was like, but I'm very much a guy like I want to see it, and then I'm like, okay, I understand
Yes.
it now. And once I saw that, I was like, man, I think it was John Eberhard. I've talked to him about it because he's the one who kind of mentioned this to me, that there's more mature deer are going to kind of lay strategically in places where they don't have to run to find their girlfriends. They're just going to they're just going to
Yeah.
hang out at a spot and let them come to them, and they can scent check a lot more does laying off of a scrape in an area that does are going to frequent headed back to bed than they can running crazy, scent checking doe bedding areas. And they
the big ones
conserve.
figure that out.
What's that?
Yeah, and the big ones figure that out. For in terms of safety,
Yeah.
let alone.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, I know I've kept you here for like an hour and a half, dude, roughly. I want to be sensitive to your time. I know you got a little one and stuff like that. Make sure you get some nighttime in with him before he's got to hit the hay. But I have one last question for you, if you have time for one last one. It's
Sure.
It's the toughest one.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you ready?
Yeah. What do you got?
All right. It's, of course, basketball season right now, so it's kind of appropriate. You're building a 3-person team that's going to enter a 3-person 3-on-3 basketball tournament of bow hunters. And now you're not playing basketball, but they have to fill tags on a piece of public land. It could be a piece of public land anywhere. If you had to pick 3 guys to put on your basketball team that had to fill tags on public land and your life depended on it, who would those 3 hunters be?
The easy two, Andy May and Justin Wright. Those are the easy ones. Number 3, who would that be?
They can be dead, or they can be dead, alive, like with us, not with us, whatever the case is. That you can go back into the any of like the legends per se if you wanted to.
Okay, because I'm taking age into consideration.
Okay.
Because you need young spry guys to be able to do this. So I guess I didn't.
Hey, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Can you see me? I'm on video now.
Yeah, I can see you. Here, I'll throw my video on if I can find it. Don't mind the messy do I got going on here.
No, you're good. I'm sitting in the I got a baby on the way. In less than a month here, I'm sitting in the new nursery. So.
Oh, nice, man. Number 2.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yep. Congrats, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. What was the last thing you heard?
Yeah, so we'll jump back in on this the last thing I heard you say was you said, I'm going to take age into consideration. So you had Andy May, you had Justin Wright, and then you said, I'm going to take age into consideration because they got to be able to get after it.
Yeah. So I think the next one, my buddy, he probably doesn't want his name mentioned. We won't use a last name, but I got a buddy by the name of Jordan, and he's a killer. He knows how to get after it. So I would probably choose him. I'm sure there's a lot of other really, really good guys out there. I just don't know their style. I don't know what they've been through in terms of trials and tribulations and what they can get done. So those would be my 3 guys.
Nice. So Andy, Justin, and Jordan. It sounds like you're going to be safe. You're going to live a long, healthy life. It sounds like.
Perfect.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I'm going to let you get going, brother. I appreciate you coming on. Before you jump out of here, let folks that are listening know where they can find out more about you and follow anything that you have going on.
Yes, I basically just have my stuff is all on Instagram right now at this point. So you can just type my name in on Instagram and I've got it all over there.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you, dude. We'll have to check in with each other here throughout the off season and getting into next year. I always appreciate following along with what you got going on, and always look forward to watching Joe lay down a slob and win the Public Land Challenge for multiple years. Why not?
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. If you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus, and Skull Brew Coffee Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.